Welcome to episode number 8 of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast, the show where I talk to introverts who grow their business and make a difference. I'm Sarah Santacroce and I'm thrilled that you're spending this time with me today. Today is just me, and to tell you the truth, I'm a bit terrified to sit here by myself recording this podcast without a smart guest to interview. But I promised you I'd do this, so here we go. I wanted to share some feedback about the Rising Strong workshop I attended a few weeks back. So a friend of mine, Emma Collins, who's based here in Switzerland, or at least she was until August, because now she's moving back to England. Anyway, Emma has the license to teach Brené Brown's workshops, and I attended the first one, The Daring Way, in March this year, and it was a great experience. So when she invited me to do the beta test, the brand new Rising Strong workshop, I was among the first ones to sign up. This workshop has a lot to do with storytelling, and not necessarily stories we tell to others, but mainly stories that we tell ourselves in our own heads. So over the 2 days, we followed Brené's Rising Strong process, which can pretty much be divided into 3 story acts. The first act is the reckoning. That's where we walk into our story, recognizing emotion and getting curious about our feelings. Then we have the rumble. That's where we own our story. We get honest about what we're making up, what is true, what is confabulation, and also what needs to change in this story. And then finally, the third act is where we write a new ending to our story. In the reckoning part, we talked a lot about our triggers, or how we recognize that we are emotionally hooked. So for me, for example, it's hot flashes, sweaty hands, and also not being able to fall asleep. That's when I know that I'm really hooked. I just can't turn off my mind. It just keeps going over and over about the same thing, rethinking what if I said this? How did she react? What did she say? So you probably know what I'm talking about if you've ever experienced that kind of insomnia. So those are my triggers. And rather than offloading hurt, basically trying to ignore it or numb it, we really want to acknowledge the feelings and go deeper into them. So that's the reckoning part. We don't want to, offload hurt. Meaning it could be, for example, hiding behind certain shields, or numbing. Numbing can be like, for example, drugs can numb. So if you just say, I had such a bad day, and you're just kind of trying to hide your feelings behind 2 glasses of wine or something, that's part of numbing. Then the second part is the rumble, and it starts with writing down our shitty first draft, the first draft of our story, how I perceive this story. So my impression, what do I hear, what do I feel? And it's a really honest, unfiltered, unedited, and possibly unshareable story. What does this mean, an unshareable? Well, it would be so embarrassing if anybody else was reading that story. That's what makes you realize that this is really the shitty first draft. And when you're reading your shitty first draft, it might make you think that a 7-year-old version of you has written it. So, when I don't know if you have kids, but when I hear my son, he's already 10, but he still sometimes talks like a 7-year-old, just unfiltered. That's just how he feels, and that's what goes into the shitty first draft. So then it's time to get curious and really explore more about the ins and outs of our story. What do we need to learn more about? About the other people in the story, about ourselves, about our feelings. And so this is the biggest but also the messiest part of the Rising Strong process. And during those 2 days, we rumbled with vulnerability, which is also the big topic of the first workshop, the daring way. So vulnerability is a big one. Shame is a big one. Living big, I really like that one. That's where we ask ourselves if we believe that people are doing the best they can. So usually there's people who think that everybody is just doing things on purpose and they're just being bad people on purpose. And there's others who think that this person is probably doing the best they can. And it's a much healthier place to be in if you think that the other person is really doing the best they can. So we were talking about that. Then we're talking about trust and self-trust, which is also a big topic. Rumbling with loss, longing and feeling lost, forgiveness, criticism, and finally with anxiety. So a lot of very touchy-feely topics, and we went right into depth about them, and it was. It was not easy, but it definitely made you realize some things about this shitty first draft and how often you kind of just try to block out these feelings and maybe make up your own story in your head and just go with it rather than trying to go deeper and analyze and rumble and think, what's my role in this story and how do I feel and why do I feel that way? So, rumbling is definitely the right word to describe this process. And then once we rumbled with our story, it was time to write a new ending. So that's part 3. And, the purpose is really to come up with a braver ending where after you've done all the rumbling, you can really recreate your story the way you want to end it. A braver ending, a wholehearted ending. Let me give you an example of one of my stories, and just so you can kind of understand how this process, kind of goes when you're in the middle of it, because it's all very nice in theory, but what if you're experiencing it? Can you stop yourself from, this shame or these feelings? Well, you shouldn't be stopping yourself, but meaning, can you stop yourself from reacting rather than responding? So recently I finished the French version of the LinkedIn challenge, and at the end asked for some feedback from participants. And one of them, a nice guy whom I had a nice phone conversation with before the challenge, replied to me that and it really was not a positive message. So he said that he had been very disappointed and that there were too many free trainings out there, that the money he paid for the challenge would have been better invested in a book which would have been more complete than my event. And then he gave me some further advice on further improving it by spacing out emails and make it visually more attractive. So it was all, I think, I understood that he was coming at it from a positive angle and was trying to help me. I understood that, but at the same time, I was definitely emotionally triggered. My face was burning. In my head, I was saying all kinds of negative things to this poor guy. I was like, "How dare you? All you do is criticize. You don't realize how much work I put into this, and would like to see you create a similar event." So, a lot of negative thoughts and thinking, can you really do better? And what are you criticizing me for? And all of that. So at the same time, and this was going on in parallel in my head, I heard other voices that were saying, "Sarah, I knew it. You were such a fraud. They all thought it sucked, and you're just taking their money and giving no value. How dare you calling yourself a specialist? Who are you anyway? Going out there saying that you're a LinkedIn expert." So, yes, it was very clear I was emotionally hooked, and I was experiencing all kinds of emotions such as humiliation, vulnerability, shame, self-trust issues, etc. So my first reaction actually was to move away. Um, and that's also another thing we discussed with regards to shame. There's different shame shields. One is moving away, one is moving towards, and the other one is moving against, I think. So moving away means that, you retreat, that you kind of just go and hide in your corner and you don't want to talk about it. So that was my first reaction, and I think it's usually my first reaction. I don't like conflict, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to reimburse him his money. He's not happy. I'm just going to pay him back and never talk to him again. So that was my first reaction. But then I decided, okay, I need to rumble and get rid of that anger. And I did that by listening to one of my favorite songs really loud. So I was like, oh, I need to get rid of this energy. How do I do that? Okay, let's give me some music. I need to, really listen to music really loud and dance to it. And then I sent a message to a friend, just forwarded it to her and said, ow, that really hurts. And she immediately called me back, and it was really great to talk about it. And I realized that he clearly just wasn't the right person for this training, and that because of that, he didn't benefit as much. And that maybe I should have realized this at the beginning, but I didn't. When he signed up, I could have said, well, maybe you're not the best fit for this training because you're already quite advanced. So that was one of the learnings. I also learned that just because he wasn't a great fit didn't mean that everyone else didn't appreciate it. So that was a kind of, my friend helped me realizing that just because there's one negative comment doesn't mean that everything is negative and that I never have to do it again. So after having calmed down, I wrote back to him and thanked him for his feedback, which I said I admitted I had found it very hard, but appreciated his openness. And in the end, I did reimburse him for his fee because I just didn't want to take his money. If he wasn't satisfied, I didn't want to take his money. So I reimbursed him for the event. An hour later or so, he called back and apologized for having hurt my feelings. And it was much easier, actually, I noticed, to discuss over the phone because he could explain himself, I could explain myself. And I made a mental note to myself that next time I would pick up the phone when I get a message like this, and I would pick up the phone and call the person instead of writing back via email. It probably will be a very difficult thing for me to do as an introvert. I don't like phone conversations, and email is just another way of, one of the things that I do is moving away and keeping the distance. But in this case, clearly when there's not a conflict, but something that needs to be explained better than with written words. So I definitely made a mental note that next time I would pick up the phone and just give him a call. So there you have it. That's my practical example of the Rising Strong process. And I just want to end with this quote that you've probably heard before if you're familiar with Brené Brown, the famous Roosevelt quote. But I like it so much that I want to read it to you again. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause? Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement? And who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly? Next time I will speak to Alan Mayer, a sales expert and founder of sellingforintroverts.com. That's it for this episode of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. There's no golden nugget implementation cheat sheet today, but if you don't have it yet, come over sarahsantacroce.com/episode 8 and get your free 4-step guide on how to say no to grow. And if you like this episode, please subscribe to this show on iTunes or Stitcher and tell your introverted friends about it. I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. I know it seems long, but time flies, and pre-excitement is half the experience.